Okay, so aging, it's I've been meaning to do this presentation for ages. I've actually been bumping it along every time somebody else has an idea for a different presentation. So it's been on the back burner for a while, but it's something I've really been interested in. I've got a barrel of my own, with good and bad experiences, and I'm also interested to hear about other people's experiences. Um, beer or wood and beer go really well together for various different reasons. And I also found researching this, it's a crazy big topic. So I thought I'll just split it into a sort of talking about barrels as such, talking about a bit of the wood chemistry and what really goes on when we barrel age. And then at the end, talk about how we actually um, do it as a home brewer. What are the sort of top pro tips? What works, what doesn't work, and so on. Okay, so ah, yes, okay. So we always talk about barrels, but the word barrel is a little bit, it means different things in different places. The real term is actually casks. Cask is a generic term for all cylinder-shaped wooden staved vessels held together with wooden or metal hoops and possessing flat ends or heads. The word barrel is more common in the American industry, and they use it a lot, whereas in the UK it's cask or barrel interchangeably, but you can't really say which is which. In beer, we usually say barrel aged, so I'll probably use that term. The word cask originally comes from Old French or Spanish, they don't really know, and it originally meant helmet. And here's some pictures of some barrels being made. Um, so barrels are made by coopers. The history of coopers, I think, could be a whole study in itself. Coopers make wooden barrels, and on the right here we see quite some of the weird tools that they use. Um, it dates back to times that they don't actually know. They know that when the Romans conquered Egypt, that both the Romans and the Egyptians already knew about barrels. On the bottom right here, there's a little Roman mural of them carrying a ship with barrels. They do, however, know that it's the Celts that perfected it with ironworking skills, and this was around 2,000 years ago. When the Romans conquered the Celts, they actually adopted it and it spread all through the Roman Empire. Um, the skills, however, stayed within a sort of family period throughout the whole medieval time and was passed on to families. Um, to be a cooper in medieval time was a highly skilled professional job, one of the best paid jobs you could have. The reason is that a barrel was pretty much the only thing you could have that was waterproof. So they stored everything in it, from valuables to food to clothes. If you were rich and you wanted to travel anywhere, you put it in a barrel. To make these barrels was incredibly difficult because of the way it's done. They also made put spirits in there, and they also made beer in there. This is everything from fermentation, storage, maturation, and serving. And barrels used to be the basic serving vessel of beer when for everything. Um, Fermentation is quite interesting. We don't really do that anymore. Um, Storage and maturation, we also know there's also a thing in Germany called a Steinbier, where they actually lower an extremely hot rock into the wort to boil it. This was because they only had wooden barrels, and it's a way to boil your wort using a wooden barrel that would burn if you used a cooker. Also, one of the interesting things that the Romans used, they used it as warfare. They'd fill the thing up with gunpowder and blow up their enemies with it. Um, Again, I could talk a lot about this, and I thought it's really interesting. There's a cooperage in Scotland, and there's a lot of similarities with the whiskey industry here. And I I went to visit this years ago, and it's actually quite something to see, where you see real coopers doing their job, and they make it look so easy, but then they have this sort of example to ask you to try and do it, and it's incredibly difficult. It's something that you take years and years and years to study, and they say the Coopers actually get paid more than accountants. So, and still today, and even back in the day when it was more sought after, it was even even a much higher paid job. Okay, so what does a barrel look like? And this is a really interesting thing, is that it's got um, a whole set of words. So a barrel consists of three hoops around staves. The staves are cut in a certain, on the bottom right here, you can see the way they're cut from the wood, and this was an American invention actually, is to cut the wood in a way such that it's in the length of the grain, and this is important, it has to be in the length of the grain, and to save as much wood as possible. In Europe before that, they used to cut it in this way on the right, and they would waste a lot of wood. Um, it's also cut in a way such that the middle is wider than the top. The reason for this is that if you pack the staves next to each other and you tighten the top and the bottom is that they curve in, and then these hoops are there to tighten it and therefore create a watertight barrel. How this is made is actually quite interesting. Um, Other things, the flat end here is called the hoop. I always used to wonder, so what's on the inside of the hoop? Is that actually more wood? And it is indeed. It's actually more wood and always exposed to the side of the grain. Um, where they meet is called the chime, but the chime is actually just a groove in the stave where the head actually fits and forms, and as it tightens, it's this waterproof um, at the top and the bottom. The top is called the bunghole, infamously, and the stave with the hole is called the bunghole stave. Mm. I thought I'd also put something in here. To keep a barrel is called the stillage, to store it. It's usually slightly on its side. That's for a barrel that has a tap. Most barrels historically did not have taps, but some of them, the head could open when they stored food in it and so on. But for liquids, everything comes in and goes out through the bunghole. Okay, so I've got a little video here, which I'm trying to get to. Is it this one? No, and I can't get to the top. Hold on. So it's only 6 minutes long, and I thought I'll share it. So if the volume's too bad,
Jack, it's choppy for us.
okay.
I think it's best if maybe we took like a 5, 6 minute break and watch it on our own.
You want to watch it at the end? Is it choppy? It's not
Or
working?
that.
Okay. Okay, I thought I'll just show you how staves are made, but if YouTube doesn't work, that's all right. Okay, so it didn't show, it was hooking. Okay. Okay, maybe we'll try again at the end, but it's really interesting to watch Coopers, how they make the barrels. They actually balance the staves and then they tighten the hoops at the top, and then they sort of warm the wood such that it curves around and they can put a hoop down at the bottom. But we won't go into too much detail if we can't watch the video because it's a little bit difficult to explain. So types of casks, we get different, again, I've stole a bit from the whiskey industry here. When we talk about a barrel, that's usually what the Americans use as a typical bourbon size barrel of 200 liters. In the UK, they used to use barrel is an older term, and they actually say cask these days. Um, in the whiskey industry, they get their casks from two places usually is European oak, and you might have heard of sherry cask whiskey, and that's usually comes in a sherry butt, which is 500 liters. A barrique is the French wine, and that's 225, and there's a lot of them because the French wine industry is quite big. A fooder is Belgium. You might know this from the Flemish Reds. They get extremely large. The smallest ones are 1,000 liters, but they actually become much larger. Hogshead is the typical European oak that they use for whiskey. They actually vary in size, but you might see on whiskies that they talk about a hogshead. Um, when they say a quarter cask, Lefroy gear on the right, that's actually just half the size. So why they call it a quarter cask, I don't know. And then port pipes, that's what they use in Portugal for port. And then there's some strange words here. You'll find many, many more called a firkin, a pin. I think you get a poly pin, which is 40 liters, a kilderkin, 82 liters. These are older names and were usually used for serving. Okay, types of wood used. So in general, we always use oak. The reason is that oak is actually got just the right balance of all the nice chemicals we like, and it imparts a really smooth flavor. This means that demand for oak is crazy. In America, which is usually the eastern side of America, is where most of the oak is grown. It's usually split between two types, white oak and red oak. The red oak, and these are generic terms. There's actually many, many types of species of white oak and many types of red oak. Red oak can't be used for barrels. It's usually too permeable. Um, White oak has to, by law, be used for bourbon maturation, at least for 2 years on American white oak. Then they ship this over to the whiskey industry and they use it as they call it first fill bourbon, but it's actually been filled with bourbon first. Um, its flavor is usually a lighter color and it's more vanilla, caramel, smoother flavor. Then we have European oak. This is interesting because there's many countries that grow oak, but it's only France that has a designated area for where they grow oak. Also, there's different species, but there's two main ones called summer oak and Durmast oak, but there's actually many, many types. In the UK, we grow oak, but it's not designated and it's sort of just cutting down an area where there is oak, but it's not like a government designated area for growing oak. Um, the European area is tiny in relation to what they grow in America, and it's actually been dwarfed. Um, so the availability of white oak is actually everywhere in the US. The European oak has got a different flavor. It gives more spice, wood, dried fruits, nut, citrus, may actually be a bit more tannic and dry as well. Other woods, again, this is a whole, I thought I'd add some slides here, but I thought I'll just add a list here because this is a whole topic in itself. Is acacia, apple adds a flavor of iron brew, apparently. Ash, beechwood, we know. Birch is actually quite interesting. This grows in the very northern parts of Europe and adds a very spicy flavor. Cedar, a peppery flavor. Cherry is quite sweet. Douglas fir is actually an American oak that grows in the northern parts of America and Canada. One of the interesting one is Mizunara is actually a third type of species of oak from Japan. And when the Japanese distilleries released Mizunara whiskies about 20 years ago, it caused quite a stir. And it creates this sort of spicy flavors that you don't get in either European or American oak. Palo Santo, one of the hardest oaks you get. If you've ever had a Dogfish Head beer that's kept on oak, they use Palo Santo. They have these massive, massive casks on them, and it gives a very sort of nutty, deep flavor. Pecan, red gum, spruce, walnuts. To be honest, I don't know what all of these do, and there's probably many, many more. Okay, so now let's start talking about beer. What style of beer can we put into a barrel? Well, pretty much anything. Typically, historically, they'd always put porters, and there's the Stingo, which we've spoken about before. They do imperial stouts, old ale is very typical, barley wines, but really anything. I stole one of Guy's pictures here that he was drinking of a Sierra Nevada quad. Thank you, Guy. Um, Ola Dubh is from a brewery in Scotland, in the smallest county in the UK called Crackmannanshire, I believe. I really like it. They use um, is it, uh, what's the distillery now? Um, they get all their barrels from Highland Park, which is a distillery in Orkney, and then they put their beer on it, and it's one of my favorite barrel-aged beers. The 40 is usually designated because it used to sit on 40-year-old Highland Park whiskey. Innocent Gun, I'm sure we all know, they actually don't just use oak chips, they do have a barrel-aged version, which is quite interesting. The one here on the top right is probably the beer that got me into barrel aging and everything is Bush Prestige. Is the Belgians put a lot of their triples onto barrels, and um, even Delirium now puts um, their Golden Strong onto barrels and are selling that as well. It's really become a thing in Belgium, and if you ever find this beer, Bush Prestige, I highly recommend it. It's probably my favorite barrel aged triple. And then there's some American ones here as well. And to be honest, the Americans do a lot more when it comes to barrel aging. There's such a variety of barrel aged beers, you get lost. So I thought I'll just put a few pictures of Firestone Walker, Brooklyn, the brewery, etc. Sour beers. And then this is a whole nother topic, and I suspect a lot of people would thought that I would talk a lot about sour beers and barrels, but I thought I'll try and stay clear. Um, so to make certain sour beers, you need barrels. For lambic, it is wood neutral, but you actually need the wood because the Brettanomyces actually uses wood and metabolizes it, and you get a much more complex flavor due to the Brett actually metabolizing wood. Um, Also, for Rodenbach and these big barrels, the Fudders, like we have in the background, they stand upright and they're actually quite porous and they let oxygen in. The oxygen then allows the Brett to create acetic acid, and then you get that typical Flemish red um, taste. So, and the permeation of how much oxygen goes in is actually really, really important. Um, One guy told me if you're looking at sour beers, if the barrel is standing upright, you're making a Flemish red. If it stand on its side, you're making lambic. Because lambic, you don't really want the oxygen, you don't want acetic acid, and so on. On the top left here, I've got a picture of Duchess Brewery Verheijen, I believe. Everyone always does Rodenbach, so I thought I'll add them as well, which is quite a similar beer. But I'm probably not going to talk too much about sour beers and barrels because it's just too big a topic in its own right. Okay, so what flavors do we expect from when we barrel age? And I've often found homebrewers when they say they added wood to beer, they said, "Oh, I added some wood chips," and that's it. When there's many, many factors that can affect the flavor. Um, And we can actually go about this in a much more scientific way. The way we think of IBU, we put a number to it, and that sort of gives you a feel for how much bitterness you have. And we talk about different types of hops. We can talk about wood in the very same way. I've just found that many homebrewers don't. So, going to try as an attempt to sort of talk about what sort of flavors do you get and how we can go about creating different flavors from barrel aging or using wood. So flavors are anything from fresh wood, vanilla, nuts, burnt sugar, toast, cacao, dark fruits, butterscotch, clove, smoke, coffee, chocolate, caramel, toffee, and that's only to name a few. We also um, we also find that the aroma and the flavor can differ. I found this in many barrel aged beers, and it can impart a fuller mouthfeel sometimes, and even sometimes a perceived sweetness, like we saw with cherry wood. Um, there's always this perception that barrel aged beers are stronger. They don't have to be, but I think judges somehow have this expectation in their head. I do. Don't know where it comes from. It helps with sanitation. If the beer is stronger is one thing, but if you've got a sanitized barrel, it doesn't really matter. I once had a barrel aged bitter, and I think it actually works really, really well. Um, and different woods give very, very different flavors. We probably could talk about off flavors as well. Fresh green aromatics and tartness from fresh or untreated wood. And what we mean by treated wood is I'll get to that now. If you just use new oak, you can get this fresh green flavor, which is quite unpleasant. An acrid aftertaste from or strong tannins. This also comes from new wood, usually. It can sometimes taste from of ash from overcharring. You won't get that if you use the barrel from someone else, but if you do your own charring, we'll get to that as well. The most common problem is infection. How do you deal with that? It can be sour, Brett, but you can get all sorts of infections. The reason is that the inside of the wood is incredibly porous, and any sort of bugs that got in there, it's almost impossible to get them out. I find you get a dry, bitter and fresh wood aftertaste. I'm not too sure if this is an off flavor, but sometimes it can be really, really strong and it just puts you off. And then also wood flavor can clash with certain beer styles. Wooded IPA, I've not had one, but in my mind, it just doesn't go. Maybe I'm wrong. Okay, what does BJCP say? Well, there's two styles. There's the wood aged beer. Um, and what they say here is pretty much on track with how I perceive it. Fresh wood can occasionally impart raw green aromatics, and this is what we were saying. Um, can impart low to moderate vanilla, caramel, toffee, toast, cacao character from any char on the wood. And this is actually incorrect, is that char does not necessarily create these flavors. It's actually toasting and or charring. Um, Alcohol character should be smooth, although they're usually stronger when people make these beers. Some background oxidation character is optional. That's true. You can get oxidation through barrel aging, but not necessarily. You don't have to necessarily get an oxidized beer just because it's barrel aged. Um, the flavor, again, they say woody, oaky flavor. It's really funny how we have in our mind what wood tastes like when often you can barrel age something and it doesn't taste anything like wood. It's more like coffee or more like vanilla and so on. Um, but yes, so you get a big variety of different flavors that come from wood. So this is the catch-all style to put any wood into beer where there's a base style. If you have wood that's been exposed to something else before and you're trying to extract that flavor. The most typical one they talk about is bourbon, because in America that's really common. Over here, it's whiskey, rum, wine, sherry, port, and even sake and tequila barrels, which I've never even heard of, but I've read about it recently. And there's a little picture here of what they call the soak line. The red line is the line between the charring and the wood, and then the soak line is when you look at your stave from a pre-filled barrel, you'll see this line of other things that have been soaking there. Um, so if that line is really thick and you've had a lot of other, say, rum in there, then and you get a rum flavor, then this is the category where you enter it. Okay, so now we're going to get into a bit of details. Is wood chemistry, is what is wood? And really, there's five parts that we're really interested in, although there's a few more. The main structure of wood is cellulose, which is the cell structure, and this is actually pretty much indestructible, although they're told that Brett can actually metabolize this. If it does, it's really slowly and so few, it doesn't actually matter so much. On the top right, there's the chemical structure, and it's basically like a um, almost like a sugar, and it creates these long, really strong chains that's pretty much indestructible. Well, indestructible from a yeast point of view, in that yeast is not going to do anything to it. The next one is hemicellulose, which is when these structures break up a bit. So they they're a bit like smaller versions of cellulose. And this is like almost like a starch that if you heat it up, you get Maillard reactions, caramelization, browning, you get stuff like furfural and maltol, which are caramelization products and Maillard reaction products. And that gives you flavors of toffee, caramel, maple, chocolate, etc. So this one is actually the more hemicellulose you have, the more sort of deeper caramel type flavors you can get when the wood is heated. Then you heat it, and then that sinks into the liquid that you're putting in there. There's lignin. Lignin is actually um, it's quite flavorless on its own, but you heat it up a little bit, and it gives these vanilla flavors that we're all and a lot of phenolic aldehydes, which has got a whole range of different fruity type of aromas. So a lot of your aroma comes from lignin. High heat, however, gives phenols, smoky, burnt, or medicinal flavors. Tannins, this you could probably say is the bad thing about wood, is that it leads to astringency. Tannins, however, are quite unstable chemicals and they reduce during heating, drying, and maturation. A lot of our heating, toasting, and charring is actually to get rid of tannins. Um, when there's low toasting or low heat, then you can still have this tanniny, astringent flavor that you get. Um, it can also create acetaldehyde and is oxidative. So it is allowed, just like we saw in the BJCP, but is usually you want it quite low. Lipids. If you taste lipids on their own, it's actually what you taste when you lick fresh wood. It's, I think we've all done this when we were 5 years old or something. When you heat it up, it creates lactones, and lactones, there's actually many, many types and different flavors, but they're responsible for the sort of coconut, fresh oak, vegetal, and even celery flavors you get in low toasted woods. So many different types of woods have a different makeup. Oak is usually preferred because it's got a very high hemicellulose content, and that is really the chemistry of it. What's interesting as well, is that wood exposure is that in the whiskey industry, they design barrels such that all the exposure is to the side of the grain, not to the cut side. If we go back to the previous one, you don't want the exposure to the side on the left-hand side. You want the exposure on the right-hand side, um, the side of the grain. And you can actually get acrid flavors if all your exposure is to those cut parts. I'm not too sure how much I believe that because cubes are literally just lots of open cut parts, and I've had some really smooth beers from that. So it's something they talk about and hammer on in whiskey maturation, but for beer, I'm not too sure if it's true. Another interesting bit is that when they make whiskey, is they always put the spirits at higher than 55%. Actually, it's usually around 70% because when the spirits is above 55, it starts reacting with the wood directly. It reacts with the hemicellulose and it creates something called lactol. Lactol is the chemical that tastes like rum. And that's why when we have a piece of a barrel that's been exposed to spirits at a very high alcohol, you have this lactol that sits in it, and then you can just extract that directly. I've also heard stories that lower alcohol liquids penetrates the wood faster and deeper. I don't know if this is true. Some say it's humidity dependent and how much of and the temperature it's in. So there are many, many other factors at play. Okay. So the next part is we want to extract flavor. So what sort of factors do we need to think? And this is what I was saying earlier. How can we think about this in a more scientific way? Is the first one, which is obvious, is the surface to volume. So if you calculate the volume of a cask and then you calculate the inner surface of the cask, and then the surface over volume actually goes down the larger the barrel. And so it's almost linear. You actually get a lot more surface to volume in a 3 liter barrel than you would in a 15 liter. So when people order these 500 liter barrels and put beer into them, they actually need to mature it for a lot longer to get the same effect. Some people just believe that actually gives you a much smoother and dependable product, whereas if you just have a whole bunch of 3 liter barrels, it leads to a lot of problems with variation, and you can't actually predict what you're going to get that well. At a homebrew level, this is a consideration because you have a 3 liter barrel, you can put it in for a few days and you can get quite a lot of wood flavor from that. Another one is time. As we were saying, if you have a larger barrel, you need more time. So you can say more, again, linearly, you have more time, more extraction. As such, there are other factors at play, again, like temperature, etc., whether or not it's a sour beer. And actually, it's not that linear, that maybe in the first few weeks or the first period, but then the flavor extraction plateaus over time. The next three things, drying, toasting, and charring, are the three things we can control. So we can control surface, we can control time, and we can also do the next three things is drying, toasting, and charring. And this comes from the whiskey industry. So the first one is drying. We are not going to dry the oak at home. This is when you cut down a tree, you cut it into bits, and you literally leave it outside, and that's called air drying. And air drying is the most common thing because it's cheap. You literally just stack them up. You cover it up because you don't want rain to get it, and it's usually anywhere from about 18 months to 3 years. And it gives you a more stable product. Sorry, it gives you a less predictable product, but once it is there, it's more stable. This is a bit of contradictory, but this is what they say. Um, and gives you more of a oaky, vanilla, nutty flavor. The other one is kiln drying, where they actually heat up wood in these big warehouses. It's much quicker, much more predictable at any stage, and you can actually dry it to a certain level that you want. Typically, this leaves higher moisture in the wood, and gives a sort of green wood, toasty, sweet flavor. An interesting one is there's a whiskey distillery, Benromach, who released two whiskies together at the same time, an air dried oak and a kiln dried oak together. And you can actually taste the flavors. And in all the blind tastings, it was the air drying one that won them all. Um, Next one is toasting. And this is what we could actually do at home. Maybe not the barrel, but we can take a piece of wood and toast it. Toasting is really, really simple. You just raise it to a certain temperature and you leave it there for a few hours. I think in the wine industry, they do this for a lot shorter period and they actually toast the barrel directly. In the whiskey industry, they toast the staves before they put it into the barrel and they actually mix different toasts. And you can actually get barrels where the different staves are just different toasting levels. When they say different toasting levels, they mean the temperature it's being toasted at. And this is really where we have a lot of control, is the lower the temperature. So you can take a piece of wood, you put it in the oven for 2 to 3 hours, and you've toasted your oak. You can't do it twice, but you can toast it, say, at a lower temperature, use it, come back and then raise the toasting temperature and then toast it at a higher temperature. But once it's at a certain temperature, you can't go down again. Um, so I tried this and I've toasted pieces of the stave that I cut into bits. I'd highly recommend it. Your kitchen smells like a hippie colony. Um, it's amazing. I toasted some at 190, I think, and gave this big vanilla flavor, and also at 230. And they oh, and and they said it's toasty, but to me it was more sort of nutty. If you toast too high, then you get acrid flavors and you don't want them. I like the idea of mixing almond and vanilla, and this really, really works. I'd highly recommend it for anyone wanting to try. This graph here is for American white oak. I'm told if you use European oak, you should reduce the temperature by about 10 degrees. So take the whole graph and sort of shift it. Um, okay. Oh, I have it here, 15 degrees. Okay. Charring. This one is quite interesting. I've also done this at home. Um, Charring is where you literally burn the outside of the wood. And in the whiskey industry, once they've used the barrel, they send it to the cooperage. And on the bottom right, they literally burn the inside again. Why do they char? It adds a layer of charred carbon that acts as a filter for impurities. I This is what they say in the whiskey industry. Why impurities? What sort of impurities lie in the wood? I'm not too sure. I thought that's what you wanted, so I'm not quite sure about that sentence. It breaks open the grain to increase surface area and it sanitizes. And that's especially important for beer, etc. It resets the previous use barrel. This is what they say in the whiskey industry. It resets the barrel. The whiskey industry, they'll use a barrel 4 times, no more, and that's after it's been in bourbon. So you'll get it in bourbon, they'll char it, and then they'll use it 4 times in total. After that, it becomes furniture, etc. High temperatures impart flavors of vanilla, caramel, and smoke, as we saw due to the caramelization. It also removes certain lactones, which we saw earlier, tannins, and sulfur. In the whiskey industry, they talk about level 1, 2, 3, and 4, and it's literally just the time that it's been charred. The lower the level, Usually level one is for shorter maturations in whiskey when they just want to do a finished barrel. Level two's got a lot more flavor, and that's just 30 seconds of burning it. Level three is 35 seconds. Level four is more intense, and that's what they call the alligator char. Over years, um, it's copied it in mirror image. Is Ardbeg released a whiskey called Alligator, named after the pattern you see on the inside of the barrel. I've done this at home. I took some cut staves and you literally just burn it and you can see the sort of alligator pattern. Um, it's an interesting thing to do. Don't overdo it, is what everyone says. And if you do it, remember to just brush off the ash. You do this after you've toasted, not before. And it also helps sanitize it. Once you've toasted and once you've charred, you can actually take this stave and put it directly into your beer. I was a bit nervous about the ash because, as you can see, there's lots of ash lying around. I took a little brush and brushed it off, but it was okay again. I think the ash actually just drops down to the bottom of the beer. Okay, how are we doing? Do we need a break?
All good so far, mate.
All good?
Absolutely, absolutely in the presentation.
Okay,
Unless people want a break.
okay, fine. I'll carry on. Okay, other factors. So those were the main ones, all, and those are the ones we really have control over. Other factors are types of woods, the barrel condition. This is really a problem as a home brewer. You don't really have that many options of what you can buy, and the best barrels they don't sell to home brewers. Um, Storage temperature in general. The higher the temperature, the more extraction you get. It's not actually that important. Um, the most interesting one I found is humidity. Is that it depends on the temperature, but pretty much around if the humidity is below 65%, then it's the water in the liquid that's going to evaporate. And if it's above 65%, then it's the ethanol that's going to evaporate. This is what they call the angel share. Again, that's not exactly true because a large part of the angel share is actually just the liquid sucking into the wood. It sucks into the wood and then evaporates. Um, there's a little graph here of the angel's share for whiskey barrels. Again, I've seen 18-year-old barrels. They are not below half. I think this is a bit exaggerated, what the angel's share looks like. You usually, after 18 years of whiskey, you'll have about two-thirds left, not one-third. Um, for whiskey, this is also a reason why whiskey does so well in Scotland, is that they want their humidity above 65%, and you want to mature it in a place where you have a lot of humidity. If you're in a dry country, you really can't mature whiskey because it's your water that's going to evaporate. And it's going to evaporate a lot. And you're going to end up with something super strong and taste of, I don't know what that tastes like, to be honest, but apparently that's not desired. Countries that do barrel aging that have low humidity, they actually have these big rooms and warehouses where they force the humidity higher. So usually whiskey they put in at 70% and it lowers the alcohol. So you can imagine putting your imperial stout at 12%. Um, you live in Australia, and then when you come out, it's, what, 15%. Is that what you want? I don't know, maybe. Something to explore with, but I found this a really interesting point about barrels as such. The wood thickness, of course, the thicker the wood, the more it'll penetrate. Is that true? Well, if there's been a lot of previous liquid that has penetrated really far, you're probably going to find the beer is going to go find the same channels that the previous liquids have done. So that's true if it's sucked, if the line has gone all the way through to the end and it's really thick, then yes, you're going to get more extraction. Um, Wood manipulation, this is rare. There are some places, some bourbon distilleries that actually add grooves on the inside to increase the extraction. You can also agitate your barrel. No one does that because it's not barrel aging if you're agitating it, but that will also increase extraction. And then there's also types of woods that have very wide grains versus tight grains. And tight grains give a more spicy aroma, and wider grains give a roasty, toasty aroma. And I have no idea why, but this is true. Okay, so now on to probably the third part is if you're at home and you think you want what this guy has on the right is a barrel aged beer on your barrel at home, and you've got your imperial stout and it tastes amazing, right? Um, so you just go and buy a barrel, right? Um, I would actually recommend it. It takes a bit of planning. You need to think what beers you want to put in there. Think of the price. I also find, do you want a previous fill or a new oak? What's the quality of the barrel going to be like? What size of barrel? I made the mistake of buying a 25-liter barrel, um, which is just too big for one batch of beers. So I have to either brew two batches or larger batches just to fill it up, or leave some behind from the previous beer, and it caused a few problems. Um, a nice 18 liter would be perfect, and you fit in exactly your batch size. A tap is really, really useful. If you can find one, you can actually bottle directly from the barrel. Flavored targets. So considering everything we've been looked at, is it charred on the inside? What is the toasting level? To be honest, they won't tell you. They'll say it's lightly toasted or something. I find that very vague. Lightly toasting, so what? It's a bit sweet. Medium toast is usually vanilla. High toast is nutty in general, but usually you find it's not really what they say. The wood will be a bit darker the higher it's toasted, but that's all you really have to go on. So um, we don't, we, us as homebrewers, we don't really know. We're not speaking to people who really care about what we're doing. Um, what style of beer do you want to brew? I know you can put many different beers in there, but if you're just going to make imperial stouts, maybe you want more of a nutty flavor, or you want to target vanilla flavor because if your barrel is toasted at 190 degrees, you're pretty much just going to get vanilla all the time. Um, your long-term view, storage space is important. You cannot store your barrel outside. In the cold, it'll leak. Also, the evaporation's uncontrolled. You do, as the temperature fluctuates between summer and winter, you actually get more extraction that way as the barrel swells and not. But in my view, and I have actually met people where the barrel starts leaking when they kept it in their garage. So if you can keep it in the house, that's perfect. It's probably the right temperature, right humidity, and it looks good. Um, I've got mine standing in the fake fireplace, and it actually makes a really nice. Um, it just stands there. People say, "Oh, that looks really, really nice," and I say, "No, there's actual beer in there." It's actually quite funny. Um, Also remember the wood expression fades over time. I've had my barrel for 4, 5 years now, and I found that's not really true. As long as you treat it again and sanitize it again, it still gives a lot of wood flavor. Do you want to create a sour barrel? Typically, they say your barrel, a typical 20-liter barrel, will give you a lot of flavor, and then you do 4 beers of about a month each inside it, and they'll all be very woody. After that, the wood expression fades over time. I'm thinking, why is that an issue? Your next beer is just going to sit for 2 or 3 months. The next beer, again, 2 or 3 months, and maybe in a year's time, you need to leave it for 6 months if the beer is strong. Even that much. I don't actually think that's a problem. So a sour barrel, a lot of people would say once your extraction fades, turn it into a sour barrel. But I've actually found it takes years and years of many different beers for your wood extraction and the flavor you get out of that to disappear. If this is all too much trouble and it's too expensive, the very point here is what else can we do? Is to put wood into our beer. The most common one is chips and spirals. This is very unpredictable, and you'll often just buy this pack of wood chips saying light toast, and you don't know what the surface area is. You don't know what light toast means. And often I find because of all the cracks and stuff in the chips, a lot of beers get infected that way. Um, to take chips or cubes and to sanitize them, people recommend steaming, even boiling them, leaving them in whiskey. I find the whiskey method is okay, but I've also heard of people still getting infections after that. Um, cubes are a bit better because you've got more control over the surface area. And I've had some seriously good beers using cubes. Lee keeps buying these cubes and selling it to many people in the club. I've used them in quite a few beers, even put them in the keg, and they work really well. Um, but again, if you want to change your flavor, how do you go about this? My favorite one to date is staves, and this is what I showed at the beginning of the presentation, is buy an X barrel stave. If it's an ex whiskey one, okay, it's going to be a specific flavor, but try and buy one where that it probably didn't have that much flavor. Then you can toast it to your own level. You can take different staves and toast them to the level that you want, and you can actually mix different staves of different flavors, and you can get a much more complex beer. You can also char, which charring a cube I think it's possible, but it doesn't crack open because you're not exposed to the side of the grain. So you don't actually get the advantages from a cube than for a stave. Um, Staves, I think you chop them up, cut them with an axe, and you measure the surface area. Then you can start thinking about, okay, I've got a certain toast level, I've got a certain char level, which I guess you look at it, and what is my surface area and how long am I going to put it? And this, over time, you can start thinking about what flavor you want to impart into your beer. And we can start thinking about it scientifically rather than just chucking in some chips and seeing what it does. Um, Also, a stave, once you've toasted it and charred it, it's sanitized because you've killed everything in there. So you don't need to go down the boiling route and all of that. You can do this with cubes as well, cubes and chips, and you could toast them as well. I've not done that, but I guess that's another way of sanitizing them. Okay, so once you buy a barrel, what do you do? Usually, when you get to the first time, you just want to put your beer into it. Do not do this. I think anyone who's had it, the first thing you do is you add some cold water, slosh it around, pour it out. You'll see there's a whole lot of stuff that comes out of it. Even if it is a new barrel, you'll still see this. Then fill the whole thing up with boiling water. That can actually take a while because you need quite a big um, thing on the stove filled with boiling water. This swells the barrel and it actually shows you if there are any leaks. So it swells it up, and if there are any leaks, it'll actually close it up. It also helps to sanitize the barrel. For many barrels, if it's a new one you bought, this should be enough. I found it wasn't. I did this and I still got a lot of infections in the very first beer I put in. So another option is to sanitize chemically or with steaming. So I'll probably first talk about steaming, which is at the bottom. So you can buy a wallpaper steamer, and quite a few people, you can get one on Amazon for 40 quid, even though the machine is a bit bulky, and you actually just steam it. And steam is hotter than boiling water. So you actually, and you just wait until all the wood and the whole barrel is way above 100 degrees, and you're killing off all the bugs inside the wood. So even if they're inside the wood, you're killing them off anyway. I decided not to buy one, and there's a picture on the right, and I took my Bruzilla and sort of plugged a pipe and then just left it like that for 2 hours. And the stuff that came out was actually quite horrendous. It was the sort of black liquid, I guess, from the previous charring and so on that was in there. But it worked. And I had a sour barrel and I steamed it and then chemically cleaned it and chemically sanitized it and put a clean beer into it, and it was fine. So chemically, if you go online, usually what they say is mix a mixture of citric acid and potassium metabisulfite. You'll notice it's a bit different to sodium metabisulfite in that, correct me if I'm wrong, but sodium kills yeast and stops it metabolizing, where potassium actually stops it from growing and metabolizing further down the line. So it inhibits cell growth within the wood, and that's why they recommend potassium metabisulfite. The citric acid is to create an acidic environment. Um, that is the normal way, and you actually need quite a bit of citric acid and potassium metabisulfite to do that. And add that with lukewarm water and fill the whole barrel up, leave it overnight, and that is the typical way, and it works quite well. Another way is sulfur dioxide. This is what they use in the sherry industry. If you drink a lot of whiskey, you'll find some of them smell and taste of sulfur. That's because they bought sherry casks from Spain where they left a dried barrel and they burnt sulfur inside the barrel to sanitize it. The whiskey industry do not like this. You get distilleries like Macallan who have actually bought whole areas and plant their own oak trees, put their own sherry into it to make sure there's no sulfur used in the oak barrels. It's a bit of a dispute that Scotland has with Spain is the use of sulfur dioxide. So sulfur dioxide works, it kills everything, but you leave a flavor of sulfur in the wood. Another one is once you've done this, you could nuke it the other way around, add sodium carbonate, again, quite a lot in some boiling water, and then you go the alkaline route. And if there's anything that survived the acid attack, it'll be killed by the alkaline attack. Other methods I've heard of is you fill up with some whiskey and you shake it around, turn it around, leave it, shake it around, and so on. That also works. I've not done this, I don't know. Once you've done this, rinse it all again with boiling water, and then repeat this exercise if you're not using it. They say repeat it every few months, but I think you could probably leave it 6 months to a year. Leaving it, meaning leaving it full in a citric acid and potassium metabisulfite solution. If you're going to do this, some of the citric acid drops to the bottom. Make sure that you slosh stuff around and make sure the citric acid comes out. It'll come out when you steam it, actually, and before you put any beer into it. Any questions at this point? Okay. Racking beer into the barrel. There's actually a tool made just for this. It's like so it's called a racking wand, used specifically for barrels, but it's like a big beer gun where you can actually pump oxygen into your barrel and then fill it all up and then it's only CO2 and you actually fill it up and you can use it for racking the beer out again in an oxygen-free way. They're not too expensive. It's probably quite easy. Another way is if you've just got the bung hole, you put a whole lot of CO2 and you just keep pumping CO2 until that's all you smell that comes out, and you just rack normally. And you should, it's the first bit of splashing, which is usually the problem. You don't want too much oxygen in there. So, and I've got some pictures here of um, people racking into kegs and also from the wine industry, but it's pretty much the same method that people use everywhere. Um, if you're not too concerned about CO2, you can just rack normally as well. But, with beer, oxidation is always a problem. Okay, so other considerations while storing, storage space. Do not store in the cold. I think I've said this. Aromas of infections from surroundings slowly seep in. So if you put your barrel in, say, the bathroom and there's lots of cleaning products around, it does actually seep into your barrel over time. So think about where you keep it. Your humidity matters. We actually spoke about that earlier, about the extraction. Um, and if it's outside the house, consider keeping it somewhere heated. What a lot of people think about is headspace, is typically when you fill the barrel, try to fill it up to the top. Um, Over time, the headspace will actually decrease as the beer penetrates the wood and evaporates. It's not usually a problem, even though some people think it could be, as long as you don't open the barrel. It's just like opening your fermenter. If you're going to open your fermenter, take a sample. Well, same thing applies as with a fermenter. Just you can either purge with CO2. What I've also done in the past is add a little bit of sugar, it starts re-fermenting, and it fills the whole thing up with CO2. And you just have an airlock on the top of the hole as usual. Um, if you have a leak, I've not experienced this. You have different ways, different solutions. Some people say just hammer the hoop. So you turn it upright and you actually hammer the hoop down and it actually tightens the barrel. And this could actually solve the leak. I don't know. This has not happened. Another one is you get the special type of wax called barrel wax. They say beeswax works just as well, but and you can actually put that in, and it it should or just apply it, heat it up, and it actually sinks into the leak and solves the problem. Another one I read about is you use a mixture of distilled water and flour, put it onto the leak, and then blowtorch it. Um, don't know, maybe it'll work. Another person said they just stuck a toothpick in there. Other people said they tried that and it actually made the problem worse and it ruined their barrel. Bottling, I guess that's the same problem you have as with a fermenter. My barrel has a little tap and I've actually borrowed bottled directly from the barrel. You might need to tip it a bit. Sometimes there's a little bit of stuff from the dregs, as little pieces of wood fall off or ash from the charring and so on. So maybe not from the very bottom, um, but or you can just use a racking, just rack it into a bottling bucket. Or I think what most of us would do is don't even bottle, just cake. Okay, so I've finished my bit from now. Do we have any questions so far? Because the next part is I'm going to move over to Ken. Ken, are you there?
Can I ask a question? Sorry, I know you referred to other woods being used besides oak, but it sounded like a lot of the science was based on like, how much you toast oak specifically. How much do you think is like transferable to other woods? And
Um,
obviously in there, I'm not thinking about barrels itself, but like, maybe using a cube or a stave or something like that.
to be honest, I don't really know. I know some lighter woods like birch, if you toast it, go lightly. And do you get the same flavor profiles? Probably not, because you're going to get a lot more spiciness because it doesn't have as much hemicellulose, so it's not going to benefit as much from toasting and charring. If it's a darker, harder wood, it probably would. It depends on the chemistry makeup of the wood, how much hemicellulose you have, and how much tannins and so on. So the big answer is I don't know. It's an extremely complex question. Is what does toasting do to different parts of wood? I don't know. Yeah, but
Okay.
maybe we can explore, get different types of woods, toast them at different levels, make different beers. I think that's quite an experiment. Yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking just because like obviously with smoking meat, for example, you would have like fruit woods quite often, like apple, and that or even apple wood smoked cheese. I would imagine there's certain profile that is different from oak, but is still kind of desirable in some way.
Yeah, I don't think the smoke flavor you get from a certain wood is the same as you'd get as when you put it into your beer. Um, my neighbors cut down an apple tree and they gave me a whole lot of wood, and I took some of this and smoked my own malt, and it was actually quite nice, even though there was this ashy element to it, because the fire got too close to the malt. But I'm told, and I've still got some pieces I'd want to actually put into beer. I just haven't got around to it. That when you put apple, it actually tastes apple wood into your beer. It tastes like iron brew, which is not at all what you get from smoked apple wood. So, um, and I think that's probably true for all wood, is that the flavor you get from smoke is different. That's interesting. Is Ken? Yeah. Are they? Ken, can I pass on to you? So Ken said he's going to talk a bit about his experiences. So Ken sent me some words, and you just tell me when to um, move to the next slide, and I will, and I pass it on to you. I think you're on mute. Okay.
On mute. Yeah, yeah, I did start when I was on mute. Just got to find my own notes here. Um, so I think quite a lot of what, or certainly some of what I'm going to say, Jacques has already covered to some extent. But this is really sort of my experience of using a barrel over the last. Well, really, I've only had one over the last year, and so far, it's everything that I've done has gone pretty well. So I thought I'd jot down a few. Uh, there was more sort of hints and tips really for to pass on to anybody else. So starting off with if you buy a new barrel like you can get from the malt miller and various places. They look a bit sort of gimmicky, but I've had several people in the past saying, "Oh, you don't want to try and put beer in that. They don't work." All this, well, that's all nonsense. So I bought a 5 litre one, and I've done all this stuff with it, and I'm really really glad that I did that because they do work, and you can make really good beer with these barrels. So the first thing is if you buy a new one, you kind of got to break it in. I think Jacques has already mentioned some of the process that you have to go through. Um, a lot of the barrels that are available, um, you, well, a homebrew size that you don't take. You do get some that are toasted, but quite often they're virgin oak. So I bought one that was virgin oak. Um, so the first thing you do is as was been said before, is to fill it and to let it stand for I was advised 48 hours, and you just that just causes the wood to swell and seal any stave gaps where possible leakage could occur. It also the barrel I got came with instructions to say not to hammer in the bung and wooden spigot, but you're gonna have to. ignore that instruction, because if you don't hammer them in a little bit first, they just pop out again. So you do need to give them a bit of a tap to make sure you get an initial seal, and then once the wood has expanded, then they sort of become more self sealing. Um, so when you let the water out, then um, give it a taste, because you'll find that oaked water is actually really, really tasty, and you'll be surprised how good it tastes, and you'll probably start to question why oaked water isn't a thing. I did actually think, oh, maybe you could carbonate this and sell it, because it was really was surprisingly tasty. Um, okay, so you've dealt with the leaks, got your barrel up ready to go. Um, Another recommendation is to get some beeswax. You can get it from wherever. So just to rub into the exterior, just to kind of, yeah, it's a sort of a belt and braces thing, really. But my advice here is to take care when you're rubbing it in with your hands, because some of these barrel hoops have got sharp bits on them, and a couple of times I was vigorously rubbing into the barrel and caught my hand and ended up with a gash. So yeah, you gotta watch out for that sort of thing. Um, where am I here? Where are we on the? I'm reading off that and reading off other notes at the same time. Um,
Getting whiskey flavor into it.
okay, yeah. So if you got virgin oak, you might want to get some whiskey flavour into the wood. Um, this might be an expensive thing to do potentially. For 5 litres, I bought around, I think it was 3 litres of the cheapest whiskey I could find, and even cheap whiskey isn't actually that cheap. Um, so I still probably ended up spending about 30 quid on whiskey. So that 3 litres of it, so I poured it in the barrel, and then every few days, um, I turned the barrel so that the whiskey gradually coated all the wood, and I left it in there for several weeks, just while I was really deciding what I was going to put in the barrel. Um, you can keep doing this in between beers as well. So the whiskey that's in your barrel, you can of course then decant from the barrel back into the bottles again, because it's whiskey. It's more than 40% alcohol. It's going to be sanitized, and actually, it tastes. The cheap whiskey tastes better from having been in a virgin oak barrel. So yeah, take it out, put it back in the bottles. There won't be as much left in there, as Jacques has already covered with the angels the angels share thing. So you'll lose a bit. Um, that's obviously something to bear in mind when you're brewing to fill a barrel as well. If you want to leave a beer in there for any length of time, and you actually want to have that quantity of beer at the end, um, then you should probably keep a bit of spare aside to top up the barrel. Um, Depends what you want. With a bigger barrel, it maybe isn't necessary, but when you're dealing with something as small as 5 litres, you haven't really got a great quantity of liquid to play around with, and you don't really want to lose too much of it. So I'd recommend brewing too much for the barrel, and then have a few bottles that you put aside, that you bottle condition with screw tops, and then every now and then you can top up the barrel if it's getting low, depending on how long you want to keep the beer in there for. I think you can go on to the next page then, Jacques. Yes. So, okay, the next section was on keeping the barrel sanitized. Again, some of this has been covered, but yeah, it's just generally best to keep your barrels wet. And that usually means that when one beer leaves, it's immediately replaced with another beer, after going through your cleaning and sanitation process. Or maybe not even. You might just give it a rinse out and stick another beer straight in there, particularly if it's a strong beer. If it's a weaker beer, you might want to do some sort of sanitation. Um, you can store barrels or casks short term with tap water, but you or any kind of water, but you can't do that long term because it mold and bacteria grows incredibly quickly. I learnt this lesson the hard way. I can't remember how long I left the water in the barrel for. I had it in there for a few days, and I emptied it, and I put a new lot in, and I emptied it, and then I forgot that it was in there, and then when I was almost got to the stage where I was about to put my beer in, and thought, oh, I better just empty the water out of that barrel, and I emptied it, and all this green slime um, came out of the barrel, which was absolutely disgusting. Um, but you if you get spoilage like that, you can treat it. I'll go into that in a second. Um, so, okay, if you don't have another beer to go into your barrel after you empty it, you can either store it dry um, with a sulfur treatment, which has been mentioned before, which might be a bit kind of OTT for homebrewers. You can get sulfur sticks that you can burn, and I did think about doing that, but ultimately I didn't in the end. Um, in the beer and wooden beer book, there was a section that which recommended a 0.1 to 0.2% KMS, which is potassium metabisulfite holding solution. But when I tried that, I must say I didn't find that it worked. And it might be that I got my calculation wrong or something like that. So maybe the answer there was just to increase the holding solution. Another article I discovered on barrel care techniques there's an online winemaker magazine. Just randomly googling, so they recommend a sulfur and citric acid solution of 1 gram citric acid and 1.5 gram a litre of potassium metabisulfite. And yeah, I think that was mentioned before by Jacques. Where are we? Yes. Storing dry, unless you're going to sulfur it, it's not really easy to do unless you've got a premises or somewhere which is warm and not humid, because if there's any kind of humidity, even if you take all the bung out, the tap out, it's still going to get mold. So best thing is store it with beer in or with some kind of solution. So spoilage. So I mentioned before what can happen if you do get mold and crap in your barrel. It is relatively easy to get rid of unless you've left it in there for a very long time. I can imagine that might be a bit more difficult. But so you can do a 24-hour soak with 1 gram a litre of sodium percarbonate, or up to 3 grams a litre if it's a bit more serious. And then so 24 hours, empty it, and then a 24-hour soak the following day with a citric acid solution, just to counteract the alkalinity that might have been left behind by the percarbonate solution. Right, inspection. So yeah, before you reuse a barrel, yeah, give it a bit of an inspection. Well, again, on the homebrew scenario, it is slightly more difficult because you've probably only got a bung hole that you can put your eye down, or take the tap out and have a look down there. You can't really take the top off, or well, I guess you probably could, but good luck, sort of putting it all back together again. I was actually trying to come up with a way of I got hold of a the tiniest dental mirror that I could possibly find to stick down the bung hole of my barrel. The bung hole of my barrel is, I think it's about I think it's only about 20 mil, if that might even be smaller than that. So I had to find this tiny little mirror, and I stuck it down the end so I can look around the barrel using that. But of course, when I tried to look in the other through the tap, it was still too dark. So I'm thinking of somehow attaching an LED um, bulb to the handle of this mirror to reflect it off the mirror to have a look around the barrel. Maybe I'm going too far with this, and in fact, I actually haven't done anything about it. But it's something in the back of my mind for inspecting that little barrel in again. Uh, right, I think we can go on to the next one. Yes. Right. So this is the interesting part. So we started a little um, project which is based the idea of which is to keep the Gales Prize Old Ale strain going. James's idea, but a few of us have got involved, all coming up with different ideas of how to keep this strain of yeast, Brettanomyces, and whatever else might be in there. And this is the reason that I ended up with a barrel in the first place, because I thought, well, how am I going to keep this culture going like long term? And I thought, well, one thing I can do is get a barrel and put it in the barrel, and then it will work its way into the wood, and hopefully that means next time I want to use the barrel to do the same thing, all I need to do is put the clean beer in there, and it does its own thing. So that was my entire aim um, with my barrel was for preserving the Gale strain, which I guess I'm creating a sour barrel, but it started off with not being for a sour barrel. So the first things that I tried to do with this barrel was to try and sort of neutralize some of the oak flavour. And I know that Jacques mentioned that his experience with his larger barrel was that there's still a lot of oak flavour left um, after however many uses. But I found with my small one that there was quite a significant drop off with the oak flavour, and I thought, well, when I'm wanting to make sour beers in there, I don't want too much oak flavour hanging around. So I put um, 5 or 6 beers through the barrel sort of before it became the sour barrel, and each time I put a beer in there, I'd have to leave it longer to get the same character till it got down to the 6th beer, and I left it in there for several weeks, and I could barely taste any of the oak. So I actually, in the end, actually had to take it out of the barrel and put it in a keg with some of the oak cubes that I got from Lee, to give it some extra oakiness. But it, I achieved the aim of almost like neutralising the oak flavour. But yeah, so essentially it was like brewing an old ale, um, mixing that with the dregs from several bottles and the bottom of a cask of the Dark Star prize old ale. Um, Left it for several months in a DJ to sort of propagate itself, and when it was ready, I transferred it to the barrel. Left it in the barrel for about a month, so that the Brett and any other microflora could just work their way into the wood. When I was ready to put the beer in, the dregs from the barrel were emptied straight back into the DJ that it was initially in, and then I fed the culture, and which was basically topping it up to the neck with some mediocre beer, and I just put it back under the stairs for future use. So I've got some of the strain in there as well as it now being in the barrel. yeah, filled the barrel with the old ale and left a bit of headspace in there to allow for expected secondary fermentation. I didn't want a bung coming flying off, um, or even just exploding out the top, the liquid exploding out the top. Um, After 7 weeks, the beer had dropped from 10.19 to 10.10, and it had taken on a distinctive Bretty character. But there was also an unexpected pronounced level of acidity, which I likened to being quite similar to the Flanders ales. And I think that is because of the oxidation that the barrel allows in. As I think Jacques pointed out in one of the earlier slides, when you're doing Flanders styles, you actually do want oxygen to get in because that encourages the Brett to produce acetic acid, which is what it's done in this case, which was a bit of a result actually. I didn't realise it was going to do that. So yeah, produced this old ale, and it quite a few people have tried it. It seems very good. Um, but after doing that, my thoughts were, okay, I've got this barrel which has got um, this nice culture in it that I'm gonna reuse. So how do I sort of keep the barrel clean? How do I keep it without beer in it and preserve the culture? So I don't want to sort of throw a load of what have I put here? Um, yeah, metabisulfite in there. I didn't want to sulfur it because I thought that all of this was probably gonna kill what was in the barrel, leaving me with a sort of a failed project. Okay, I had some more dregs. I could redo it. Um, but reading around the subject, I noticed that I read something about wineries tending to avoid citric acid because it promotes Brettanomyces. I'd never heard of this before, but then that just then occurred to me. So, what about if I just stored the barrel full with a citric acid solution so that the pH is low enough to prevent most common molds and bacteria from growing, but not strong enough to wipe out the Brett? So, after I emptied the old ale out there, um, I put this 5 litres of just a citric acid solution in there. I left it for 4 months, um, emptied it, and then I filled it again with. I brewed a basic Flanders red type beer, which is, to be honest, definitely looks more brown. It was very low IBUs, very simple recipe, fermented clean with standard ale yeast because I'm going to stick it in the barrel and see what happens. So I stuck it in the barrel, and a few weeks later, the beer has started taking on the expected character from the barrel. The Bretta's flavour has started appearing. The beer's dried out, and tasting it again the other day, a couple of it was yesterday. Um, I've noticed that the level of acidity from the acetic acid has just started to creep in, because when I previously tasted it, it's like the acidity isn't really there, but now all of a sudden it's just sort of started to appear. So that's very interesting to me. So I think, well, okay, so I need to leave a beer in there for probably at least 4 weeks if I want to get any of that sort of acetic acid character. I think that's the last of my notes there, Jacques. I think there's just some photos left there. Yeah, there's just some some nice pictures of my process and how I blatantly don't have a way of excluding oxygen from my from my system there. Um, so that's probably helped as well. Don't think I'll be making a lambic in this barrel, but yeah, that last picture there was the sample I took yesterday, and it's started to taste quite interesting. I think I might take it out at some point and rest it on some cherries, raspberries, and something like that. Yep. Oh, back to you, Jacques.
Thank you very much. Jeez. I find it really interesting how you lost flavor in the barrel because I started losing flavor in the barrel, but once I steamed it, I actually think it sort of revived the barrel in a way. Um, and I'm wondering if the steaming actually has got anything to do with it, even though it's not nearly the
Hmm.
temperatures where you'd get toasting or anything like that.
I'd say it's probably because you stripped the a layer off with the steam,
Ah,
and everything came. So you exposed fresh wood.
so like it stripped the
Yeah,
charring to a
yeah.
degree. Yeah, okay.
That's what I would have thought.
That's probably what happened, yes.
But yeah, I mean, I started with bigger beers, and the beers got smaller actually as I went. So you'd think that the level of oakiness would be more prominent in the smaller beers, but it wasn't, because in the end it was only a 5% beer that I was trying to get more oak character into it, and it just wasn't coming at all. And that was when I realised, okay, well this barrel is good for using for my project now. So I think I need to get another one now, another of these barrels now to use as a clean barrel. If I can keep the wood flavour in it, maybe I'll have to borrow a steamer off someone and try that technique.
Yeah. So it starts. In 5 years' time, you can have a whole array of barrels. Anyway, thank you very much, Ken. That was really interesting, actually, the whole story. We have another guest speaker, Guy, who's also um, got a barrel and is going to talk about it. So, Guy, you're yeah, yes,
Uh,
over to you.
can you hear me okay? I mean, I haven't used Zoom for many years. Am I clear enough? Can you hear
Yeah,
me?
I can hear you. Yes.
Excellent. So, yeah, I'm just going to talk a bit about just the history of my barrel. I think I'm not going to go in all like I think we've had enough detail. We know probably all the things. So, probably like talk about my barrel and kind of all the relevant things that we talked about. So my barrel's a bit different actually. So, I got mine from Celtic Timber, and actually, we had a presentation. I think during lockdown, I think where Wilderness Brewing, we had a talk, I think, where we were tasting Wilderness Brewing, and the guy from Wilderness Brewing was talking about all the barrels that he bought, and he mentioned that particular supplier. And, as you do, Google that at the time and bought a barrel the same night, actually. It's one of those things like so. Anyhow, so their barrels are basically, and actually, you can still get them. Actually, I checked the other day, you can still buy them. I think they're like 180 pounds, I think, for the barrels, and they're recoopered whiskey or bourbon barrels. So what they do, I think they get old whiskey barrels and they split. I think they get the staves out and they reshape them into whatever size barrels. So like, surely it wouldn't have been a 20-liter whiskey barrel. So by the reason, yeah. So it's a bit more than 20 liters. So it's, I think, 22, 23 liters. So yeah, ex whiskey for sure. You can smell it when I got it. I mean, it really smelled very strong. Like I would think it's really good quality. It was kind of sealed when I got it, so I feel like as a barrel, it's really good. Um, yeah, the volume is a problem, and I think Jacques mentioned that. So yeah, if you want to fill it up, 22 liters is a pain if you have an all-in-one. So yeah, I've had to sometimes like do like a double brew day just to have enough to fill it up with like a strong enough beer. So what happened? So start using it. So I kind of had this romantic view, I guess, when I thought, well, it's a whiskey barrel. I'm gonna, see if I can get lots of whiskey flavors. So I didn't do much to it. Like I filled it up with water, of course, rinsed it, made sure it was sealed. hadn't had no leaks, and I think I might have probably put some hot water in at the time, but not too much. So then I brewed quite a strong, like a 10% imperial stout, put it in, left it for probably a bit longer, but again, actually another problem, 20-liter barrels, you're not going to be changing that every 2, 3 weeks. Like, I can't be refilling that. Like, I mean, unless, yeah, you leave it with something in between. So left it in a few weeks, and it became infected. Like it was kind of TCP, plastic, really nasty, nasty infection. Like, so at the time I kind of left it. Like I thought, you know what, I'm just going to leave it, see what happens. It's just an experiment. And actually, it got a little bit better. So it kind of lost some of the kind of horrible, really nasty flavor, but never fully lost it. I've got a few bottles left of that beer, so I'm probably going to bring one in actually in the next meeting, so to share around, so people can experience how bad things can go, basically, if you get a barrel like that and you just kind of don't do much to it. So anyway, so all right, I thought change tactics. So what did I do? I started steaming. Like the first thing that I thought, okay, I get the beer out before I do another beer in, I'll steam it. So then I got one of those steamers. I mean, there's also you can get like there's actually steamers as well that you can use for cleaning, like these little steamers that have like one at the end and like they're like to steam like lime scale out of your bathroom, whatever. I got one of those, works very well. Left the steaming in for like an hour or whatever to make sure like as something, and I think that's about all I did to that. Like, but did that twice, I think. Put the same style beer in, and yes, it didn't have that horrible infection. And again, I think what I'll do, I'll bring that beer in. Actually, there I've got plenty left, so I'll bring that for tasting. I think it's best to kind of do that for, well, people who can come to the meeting, but for sure, it still has a lot of kind of flavors beyond wood, like that's for sure. Like that, and it's for me, I must admit, it's hard to know, and I'm curious what people will think. Is it the whiskey flavor that's coming through? Is it the wood? It is a little bit. It's a very rich flavor. Like it's very hard for me to identify. Vanilla, wood, whiskey still. So it's a very kind of. There's a lot of flavors coming out of that beer, but for sure a lot more drinkable, and kind of reminds me of some of the kind of commercial barrel aged beers you can get that are very kind of rich and like rich in flavor. um right, so bottled that beer, and then I left it like for a few months, didn't do anything to it last spring, which I think we had some very nice hot days. So yeah, at some point I thought, okay, time to put the next beer in, and I poured water in, and I had basically lots of like, yeah, it was just full of holes. Basically, the water was running out from the bottom, like so I managed to do a thing that you shouldn't do. So, but anyway, I think as I think people said, Ken said, I think, and Jacques said, it's fine. It's not the end of the world. If that happens, don't worry about it. I mean, I went for steaming first. I thought if I steam it again, it'll start to expand the staves, and then fill it with water. And yes, like probably a day later, or everything's back sealed. So that was fine. So then I thought, well, the next beer I want to brew is a Stingo, like something like that. So something like strong ale, not as big as the Imperial Stout. So I decided to do a little bit more kind of cleaning. So I did again, people mentioned that I did the sodium percarbonate, like leave it in there for 24 hours. Then I used the potassium metabisulfate. So I kind of decided, let's now take kind of as much out as possible to get a little bit more neutral kind of beer, and that's where I'm at. So currently there's this Stingo kind of style beer that I've put in, and I've kind of, yeah, I thought now I want to scale it back, because nice to have the strong flavors, but I'm kind of looking forward to a slightly more neutral flavor and slightly just more balanced and kind of the wood flavor. So yeah, so that's only my third beer actually. So as you can see, I'm not really, but yeah, for 20 liters, like you can't, I mean, I don't know, you can't like change that beer every 3 or 4 weeks. That'll be like a lot of beer to do. And so that's kind of, yeah, maybe my long-term plans, which is also something that Jacques mentioned. I'm thinking, I'm still not sure, but I feel it might eventually become a barrel I might use to do lambic. And like lambic, I might, because I've started doing lambic, it might be an idea to try to like have one lambic batch in one of those. But again, today that wouldn't be the right time because I think there's still too much kind of strong flavor in there that would just completely clash. That would be one of those things that I think you don't want to do a whiskey barrel that with lambic. Another one of those things I can't imagine. So, and that's it really. I think that's, yeah. I mean, if people come to the next meeting, there'll be some beer to taste that goes alongside with what I've just talked about. It's probably going to be more useful than me talking about it. But yeah, so I still think it's a good idea. But yeah, if you get one of those, expect a lot of flavor. Like, you're not going to get a neutral beer. And I think what Ken's doing now, after whatever a year, you were saying, I don't think you're going to get it out of that barrel for a while. Like, this kind of slightly more woody balance where you feel you can control the flavors. It's still, this just kicks off so much flavor. So, yeah.
Ah,
But that's it. I know it's a bit short, but I thought it's just another story.
thank you,
Any
Guy.
questions?
Any questions?
Um, I've got I think probably a 25-liter barrel like you, Jack, and I would agree, volume wise, it's too much. It's just way
Yeah.
too. And I think maybe something like a 12-liter or a 10-liter would be just perfect. But and funnily enough, however, like Ken, I found that my oak flavor that I'm getting from the beers dropped off really quite well, I suppose relatively quickly. And the last beer I put in there, which was an Imperial Porter, I left in there, I think, for about 3 months. And in the end, I pulled it. And uh, what with me sampling bits and what have you to test it, it was oxidizing faster than it was oaking. There was very little oak character, and I ended up doing a similar thing and putting it into a keg and putting cubes in. Um,
Wow.
so and I steam. So uh,
Did
yeah.
did you check the level? How much liquid did you lose? Could you tell the level of the beer?
Um, how much was I losing? Not a inordinate amount. I keep mine actually pretty much in a cellar actually, so the humidity, it's probably pretty good actually. And I wasn't having to top it up that much. I'd kept maybe 5 liters of the original beer in like a mini keg, so I was filling it up with that. Every time to keep the level nice and high. But yeah, it just compared to the original beer, which I still have some bottles of, which is quite full and rich, the barreled version in the end ended up tasting sort of a bit thin and but yeah, almost old ale, I suppose, in the end. A tiny, tiny bit. It was, and there really wasn't much wood richness that I was hoping to get from it. So yeah, I don't know what I'm going to do with mine next, but it's definitely lost a lot of the oak.
Well, people go down the sour barrel route, don't they?
Yeah. Yeah,
Uh,
I'm not a huge sour fan, but the old ale experiment appeals to me. But I'm just not sure I want 25 liters of every time.
I mean, especially if you're getting oxidation, then maybe the sour barrel with Brett or a Flemish red is probably a really good route.
But no, great presentation, guys. Like the detail and everything was amazing. Yeah, loads of food for thought, and yeah, it's brilliant.
Okay, I've just got some references. Don't really have references. This is the book that Ken mentioned. Also, I was trying to show a YouTube video of how they make barrels. If it all hooks for everyone, then maybe we'll skip that. I've also got another video of how they char a barrel. I've seen it done in real life. It's actually quite something, and you can feel the heat from it. But I think we'll skip that part. Um, so questions, or maybe I'll just stop sharing. Okay. I think everyone can see my video or this. I've got a whole pack of staves that I cut up. This is one that you can still see the, what do they call it? The crows. So that's a stave, and then it was chopped like that, and the whole thing is, oh, I don't know if you can see it, but it looks like alligator skin from here. Oh, probably not in that video. But yeah, I just sort of clasped it and blowtorched it that way and threw it into the beer once it cooled. Um, I find actually making wooded beer, I find this is the way to do it. I find it more predictable. You don't have to worry with all the barrel problems and all of that. Um, my barrel, I bought it probably 5, 6 years ago. I made 5 beers. The first one was infected. The rest after that was actually quite all right. I also made a Stingo from that. Then I turned it into a sour barrel, and it sat there for years. At some point, there was a mixture of something that got in the barrel because I put mixtures of different lambics in there. So it attenuated to the highest of whatever mixture I put in there, and it would attenuate to like 100% every time and sour it to degrees that takes the skin off your teeth. The one I actually quite liked. So every year I would just take it out and put some more in, and I did that for about 4 years. And the one I actually kept, and that I've still got, and I plan to blend it with some other beer because it's incredibly sour. But I thought if I mature that for a few more years, I can use it for blending. So it's just sitting there. Then I took the barrel and I nuked it. So I steamed it like I showed in the picture. Then added the citric acid and the potassium metabisulfite, cleared that out, and then added an alkaline, which I can't remember, and then cleaned that out. And I put Belgian blonde onto it. And that, I think some of you might have tried that one, and that actually came out all right. Um, Cleared that out and put a barley wine in, and that I just left and forgot. 6 months later, tasted it. Yes, very woody, but it's infected. So maybe that was just part of the racking process, or there was something in the wood that the previous beer didn't pick up. I don't know, but it's a continuous problem, and dealing with my barrel right now just seems like a major task. I'll rather have a brew day than deal with my barrel. So yeah, that's where it is. I find the whole thing, and for me, staves is the future. You don't need much, and you can, according to what we were looking at, you can toast it and you can char it to the degrees you want, and I feel you've got more control as well. Yeah,
So, Jacques, with the staves, then, would you saw them into pieces or would you chop them with an axe? What's the
both.
difference, and does it make a difference?
Um, so you have a stave, so you saw it, and then when you have that piece remaining, you chop it with an axe. So both. So make how to make beer with an axe. Um,
Well, I guess you could get a lot of character from the axe if you put it into your beer. It just might not be great.
the idea is that it all gets killed in the toasting anyway, so it doesn't really matter. It's only if you've got dust and stuff on there when you put it into the beer that you have a problem. Um, yeah, I don't do enough of it. I brew beers and then I realize, oh, that's maybe I could have put some wood on that. But I've got all these ideas for wood, but I've got more ideas for beers which don't have wood. So it's just a sort of side idea and a side project. But I've made some. I think in the swap I gave two of the triple, the wooded triple. I think Ken, you grabbed one. Yeah, which had and I think Guy, you might have tried one as well. It's had a lot of like a triple, but a lot of vanilla and so on, and that was using staves. Um, and that sort of made me think that yeah, that's the way to go. Um,
And I guess then for lambic, at least in this case, we're sorry, I really trying to steer away from the sour beer discussion. But if you have a stave in your lambic demijohn, as you know, we seem to be using the 5 liter one these days, you could then transfer the culture in a sense on a stave from one demijohn to the other. Is that
Absolutely.
right?
If you're making lambic, always make sure there's a tiny bit of wood in there because part of the flavor actually comes from the Brettanomyces exposure to wood. So even if it's a little bit, always make sure there's some wood in there. And yes, you can then use that wood to transfer cultures. Absolutely. Yeah, a lot of people do.
Yeah. Yeah. I like
Did you do
for
the
my very
same
first
thing?
lambic. Go on.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I just wanted to say I definitely overegged the wood aspect in my first lambic. Like it's nice, but you can really taste the wood there.
Yeah, you literally just need like 2 or 3 cubes. It's not much, but they tend to sink over time. They sink to the bottom. Yeah.
How long would you leave it on the stave, Jack?
Mm.
I mean,
So,
is that would you do it like a I don't know, like a dry hop, couple of days? Would you put it into the keg and run it for a period of time, or
okay, so let's get into the maths of it. So these are about 20 centimeters long. I'll speak in centimeters, or shall we speak in inches? Um, so say they're like 9 inches long and 1 inch thick. So you can calculate the surface area. It's not 4 times the surface area, it's 3 because when they float, the part that's floating outside is not exposed to the beer. Unless you shake it up and it actually rolls, then you might have more exposure. So you can work out what is your surface area and the time you leave it. So if you do double the surface area and half the time, is that the same? I don't know. It's assuming it's all linear, right? And so on. But I think 4 of these staves for, I think it was 10 days, gave a massive, massive, big oak vanilla flavor. And 2 of them were toasted at 230 and the rest toasted at 190. And I think the vanilla sort of took over from the oak. Um, yeah. I think one can make a science out of it is surface area exposure per liter per day and create like a little mathematical thing. Um, I don't know.
Yeah, but then perception is subjective.
As well, as well. And I also think,
So it would be a very personal scale for your taste buds, how you perceive wood, and probably for the same stave. If you use a stave from a different barrel, it would be a little different because the character would be very different, unless obviously you got a stave that's fairly fresh and not been through charring, etc. Right?
and I also think the amount of time needed given to give the vanilla flavor is much less than it is to give the sort of light toasted sweet wood flavors that you get from the lighter toasts, which might need a little bit more time. But I really haven't made enough beers to experiment with this. Lee's made quite a few beers with cubes, and a lot of them have come out really, really well. And he usually uses medium toast, which usually means you get a lot of vanilla. Yeah.
Yeah, I've
Can I,
been
can
using cubes quite a bit, and sorry, just to say something, and I've been treating them as any other ingredient in grams per liter because they're pretty much all the same size all the time.
And that's why I prefer cubes over chips because you know how much and you can actually repeat what you did last time. With chips, you just don't know.
Can I just ask in terms of like one of the things that has been mentioned was like soaking in whiskey in particular, but I mean like I've heard of people like soaking in like rum to impart rum flavor, for example. Um, do people do that also with like staves or cubes? Is that kind of cheating too much? I mean, because it's basically you're sort of making it absorb into the cube and then absorbing it into the thing. I mean, I guess there's probably some process to it. It's not just like topping it up with a bit of rum, but um, uh, yeah, what's the thought on that? And then I guess related to that, tangentially, um, I've had, I think from a beer swap, somebody had put in some cubes into a bottle. Is that considered something that you're not meant to do for like competitions because it's sort of unblinding your thing? Like because obviously if you pour out a beer and it's got oak cubes in it, you're gonna be, oh well, it's got to be oaky.
Well, I don't know what the second question is, but the first question about adding, leaving it in rum and so on, yes, I've done that. I used to have all these little jars standing with different whiskey, rum, vodka, even wine as well. Leaving wine, wine cubes works really well if you're making like a Brett beer. I find the flavor works quite well. And you just put them in jars. You don't know what beer you're going to make, but just leave them. And then at some point they're going to be sanitized. And then at some point you have a beer and you decide, oh, I might just add some wood. So then you just add your cubes that you have in whichever liquid you want. So I guess what you were mentioning is that people add the actual rum that it was soaking in into the beer as well, which works really, really well because the flavor of the oak has been pulled into the rum or the whiskey, and you get this intense flavor. Is that valid for a competition? I think people allow it, yes. Yeah.
I think it's one of those things where originally a lot of the sort of wood aging of beer came from, in some cases, trying to add that spirit flavor into a beer because they can't just add it directly. So yeah, I mean, I've done that in the past and it works really well. You can add a bit of the wood and add a bit of the spirit, and off you go.
Yeah, I definitely
Yeah, I
recommend.
actually wanted to like a little bit perhaps talk about my experience of that, and also I'd like some creative ideas on the cubes. So on soaking your cubes in alcohol. When I made this is like years ago now when we were all in lockdown. When I made the Imperial Stout, I wanted to do like a bourbon and wood aged version of the stout, but um, at the time I had absolutely no idea what I'm doing. So what I did is I just soaked the cubes in bourbon for probably a couple of weeks at that point, and then at bottling, literally measured out 10 mils of that bourbon and topped up the bottles of the Imperial Stout and just capped them. I was an absolute idiot because I only uh, made 3 bottles like that. It's like one of the best beers I've ever made, and nobody except for me has ever had it. And sorry, guys, but not gonna happen. I only have one left. So in essence, that is cheating. That's because that's not really wood aging the beer, right? But the results there are first of all very repeatable, and secondly, you can pre-blend whatever beer you're planning to wood age, and you can measure out very, very precisely how much of that wood and alcohol flavor to add. So and from a judge's perspective, well, you as a judge, you have no idea if it stood on wood or you added the wood flavor to it, right? The other thing is I have this jar of bourbon, and there's about twice as much bourbon here as wood cubes. And as I've been using up the wood cubes from different brews, most sours, obviously, I've just been putting them here. The bourbon is absolutely vile, from like the extreme tannic flavor. But the wood cubes themselves obviously contain a lot of flavor, and I would imagine the bourbon has leached out a lot of the tannins from the wood. What would people say the cubes should be used in, considering probably they don't have any tannic character, but a lot of bourbon? Any ideas?
Quad.
Okay, I like that.
We did a barrel aged quad with Rich Lock, and it was in the bourbon. It was originally a bourbon barrel, um, and yeah, it was fantastic. It aged really really well. So there's one suggestion for you.
If there's lots of
I
tannins.
think if there's no,
Sorry.
I was just going to say, if it's not very tannic, I'd be tempted to play around with something pale, where tannins would might clash, where a darker beer would support them. So I might be tempted to, like a Hellesbock or a Belgian, something pale and Belgian, or
But I imagine they would have a lot of bourbon flavor still. So it's like a bourbon white pale ale or something like that.
bourbon Helles.
Yeah, bourbon Hellas, or I don't know. Because I obviously don't know. I might pull a cube out and just stick it in a bottle and leave it for a couple of weeks to see what happens. But I somehow don't imagine there's going to be a lot of wood flavor left in there.
Just
Because
take
the
one out
bourbon
now and pop it
itself
in your
is
mouth.
just. Give me a second.
Can I ask, just out of curiosity, around the room, what are the sort of lower strength beers that people have done with barrel aging or oaking? Because yeah, as you say, like doing 20 liters of like Russian Imperial stuff, I mean, like who's gonna drink it up? I think we've always been in that, I'm sure we've all been in that situation of like, oh, okay, nobody wants to drink my 10%er anymore.
Nice, Serge.
I'm just looking at Serge's face.
My tongue is numb, right? It's like licking wet wood, zero wood flavor, but so many tannins. It's like a dry tea bag.
I've had a wooded ESB, and I thought it was amazing, and that was 5%. Lower than that, I don't think I've had.
I think that potentially a bitter could work very well in wood. I think you'd have to tone down the bitterness of the beer before you put it in, but I think it potentially could work very well with the sort of, particularly, just your English sort of hops, the sort of rustic sort of earthy flavors could work quite well. I mean, I did that version, my own version of the Innis and Gunn Pale. They do a pale beer, and I did that on Virgin Oak. That was 6%. Because I would, like you were probably thinking. I thought, well, I can't just put like killer beers in this barrel all the time. I want to make something that's actually sort of potentially sessionable. I know 6% isn't sessionable for some people, weaklings. Um, but yeah, that so I tried that sort of rest, and that actually worked really well. Again, just like keep the bitterness a bit lower than you would normally, because you're going to pick up some tannins from the wood. And yeah, that was I was really really happy with how that turned out.
Has anybody done like anything like a Märzen or a Vienna Lager or something, like a sort of malty, but sort of slightly, yeah, like a lager or a cleaner type of thing, a
I
dark
guess
lager?
I guess when we say, and Joel as well, you kind of when we were talking about it, when we say wood, we mean oak. Well, actually, I think we should be very specific that what we're talking about here mostly is oak, because if we take other woods which have softer flavors, which perhaps don't have many harsh flavors, I imagine, would marry up pretty well with some of the lighter and even weaker beers, right? Like beech comes to mind, or I don't know, maybe apple as well for something light. I've heard, I haven't tried, but I've heard of really good Grodziskie beers, which were aged in wood, or at
Mm.
least using fermentation, etc. So I think it's just because we conflate the wood with the oak and the oak with the wood.
I've done a Maibach, a not particularly strong one either, which is about 6.5, and I had a bunch of cubes from Lee, and they were the pale ones, the light toast ones, and I didn't want to use them in a dark beer, so I used them in that, and yeah, it was, I mean, super interesting. Yeah, no, it worked out well actually. I was quite happy with it. It had a kind of interesting kind of winey character to it that worked. Very difficult to describe, but yeah.
I've always been interested in doing an IPA and aging it on cedar wood because
Mm.
I've heard other people that have done it and said it works really well. So,
English style.
no, like an American IPA.
Mm.
I
Like kind
heard
of
that
like
somebody else
spruce
did
tip
one
sort of
that,
thing, spruce tip IPA, but like on cedar rather than branches. Yeah,
yeah.
that's quite interesting. I like that idea.
Yep. Unfortunately, I did read the agenda, so I didn't know there was a chat on barrel and wood, etc. Because what I have in the fridge is a bottle of birch beer that I brought back from Estonia that I haven't yet tried, and I think it uses birch branches at some point in the brewing. It's in Estonia. I haven't even translated. It just seemed interesting. It's called sauna beer. So I will report on Slack whenever I get to it.
Can't think of one at the minute. But is there like a crossover between a wood beer and a smoked beer? Is that a thing, or is that like too much of one element in a beer? Could
I've
you
had
like have a wood aged Krasitsky or something like that? You were talking about like light beers earlier, or would they clash rather than complement each other?
Well, I don't know.
Okay.
I think the answer it really depends because you might not even notice or be able to separate the two in some cases.
I don't know what I was thinking, maybe, yeah. Smoked is very distinct to wood. They are separate characters, aren't they? But could you have them together like a like a bonfire beer or something?
I think if
Maybe
you
you could
extract
try blending.
yeah, but if you extract mostly the aromatic, your nuttiness, your vanillas, your caramel flavors from your wood, then maybe you wouldn't notice them, they wouldn't clash. But if you used virgin oak with that very intense wood flavor itself, probably then you would find that it kind of like cuts through the smoke, but not in a nice way. So it
Mm.
probably depends on how you treat your wood.
Yeah, I'm not an expert in either. I just suddenly thought they're probably both
And like
derived from wood of some
just
sort.
purely speculating. Yeah.
Yeah. Like actually, because Joel mentioned it, like it's the smoked Helles. I was thinking of the Bamberg smoked beers and wondered if you could have a wooded Metz and from there, from Bamberg, something, or whether it would even work. It would just be too much of one thing, maybe, or you wouldn't be able to tell, as you say.
I've noticed how
Steve, I
in
think you've volunteered to brew one.
Certainly have not.
I've noticed how in Belgium wooded and barrel-aged beers are becoming more and more popular. There's one called Cornet, which is and it's very, very popular in most places in Belgium. Now it's not barrel aged, but it's wooded. Lots of breweries now take their triples and quads and barrel age them and make special editions and so on. And a lot more breweries are jumping on the bandwagon. It's actually becoming a thing, more so than it was like 10, 20 years ago. Um, I find that just in itself quite interesting in that do they see an export market in the sort of though for those people who love the full flavored Belgian beers? I don't know. There's obviously demand, yeah.
Maybe we should do a topical meeting in some time where and all see what we can conjure up from wood beer brewing.
But I was just wondering then I suppose if anyone lives near a forest, we don't even have to live near one. We could all, get a load of fallen wood and suppose dry it out yourself and try it. If you want to try something other than oak, I mean, southern England, we've got plenty of beech and birch around. We've got various places where you can get Scots pine and things like that, juniper even. There's all kinds really. I mean that the book there, Wood and Beard, it does go into some depth about and the different flavours that different woods can produce. So it might be a case of having a look in that and seeing what seeing what wood, and then if there's something that you can get locally, then have a go.
Yeah, it mentioned quite a lot of woods, but it didn't always tell you what flavors you get from each wood. I found, yeah, but for a few it did, yes, and so on. But there's definitely more types of wood than it mentions, and I think you can try anything, really. I'm just thinking
Is
if you
it
take wood from the forest, so sorry, Craig, you're gonna have to dry it yourself. So I think that if you dry it in the oven gives a very different flavor than when it's air dried in the way that they do for oak and so on.
it is aging in wood at all? Would it produce a similar flavor as making a tincture and experimenting with it that way, or is it a completely kind of different animal? Because that would be a kind of low risk way to do it without uh, all of the um, infrastructure you need, barrel staves, or going for a whole batch. If you could do it like some people make spice tinctures or something to add to their beers.
So you put wood into, say, vodka, and then you just throw the vodka in. So, sorry, you're on mute, Craig.
Yeah, you could try it with at a very small and precise scale, or see how much works. I don't know if that actually works for extracting the same type of flavor, or if it is a different a road to different flavors.
So I think in this case, the same rule would apply that uh, the less wood over a prolonged period of time gives you a more complex character, right? And then your base spirit would need to be very neutral. And I mean, at least to my nose and palate, vodka is not neutral whatsoever. So you would need to actually get some potentially medical grade alcohol diluted with distilled water and then use it that way because then that is as pure as you can get.
I mean, if you've got any of those little, tiny little stainless kegs or anything like that, you put it, the cubes are brilliant for that. I quite often take off just a couple of liters and stick, even just one, or I can't remember, like, I can't remember who said it, but I also do the grams per liter with the cubes. And they are, the flavors I think you get from them, especially compared to chips, are superb. I'm kind of with Jack in terms of I think I might be at the end of my barrel adventure for a while because some of the other methods are sort of more predictable. You can split batches and play around a bit, and yeah, more flexible.
Yeah, but having a barrel gives you such a cool factor. Like you can't,
But
just
what
can't discount that.
I'll keep the barrel. It just won't have beer in it. I'll fill it with Heineken.
Ian, just take the top off, stick a keg inside, close the top. You got the barrel and the beer in the barrel.
Genius. And then put cubes in the, yeah.
And yeah, and then put cubes in the keg. And you know what? From the tap, nobody will ever know.
Like the Russian doll of beer.
You could even build a kegerator in a large enough barrel, put it horizontal, yeah?
Nice. That's nice.
Okay, I need a bigger house.
I think in Germany they used to have this culture of serving out of barrels. So some of the pubs actually you can see them serving and it looks like it's serving from a barrel, but it's not really. It's actually just metal on the inside and it's got no wood flavor at all. It's
Yeah. And if you
yeah,
go around the back, there is not even a full barrel. It's just the
yeah,
front of the barrel, just the lid. That's
exactly.
it.
Yeah, just with one of those wine bladders inside.
Felt cheated. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
I need
it's
to get
like
great presentation. Really,
yeah.
really good. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, guys. Great presentation.
You'll have
Very
a
good
good
one.
week.
As well. Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ken,
Excellent stuff.
Thanks, guys.
um, do you remember that cider place you recommended to me not far from Cheddar in Bristol? Don't remember the name.
Wilkins.
Wilkins, that's the one.
Yeah.
So that was actually another one. You walk in and there's like two, big wooden barrels standing. You're like, oh right, that's fermented in barrels, etc. You get chatting to them. They're like, no, we ferment in stainless steel, and we just put it into these barrels for serving. It
Yeah.
doesn't stay there for longer than a couple of days at best.
Yeah.
Yeah, but like,
You
had I not asked, we would have never been told.
did you visited it then?
Yeah, no, it was great. I absolutely loved it. It
Yeah, it's
was
great.
it
Did you
was
get some of
wonderful.
the cheese too?
We got the cheese. Yeah, it was kind of a Bristol weekend, but we all wanted to just stay there and not go anywhere else. It was the first point. Yeah.
I was going to actually ask about ciders and barrel aging, if that's not too far off topic. Now that a lot of people have left, have other people, because I've done a bit of cider, but not done any barrel aging with the cider. I don't know if what people's experience with that, or
I have no
I've
idea.
had no, not made any. I've made like maybe what, two or three ciders. Uh, had a couple wood aged or barrel aged, but then I can't really comment from memory on having much flavor of wood or not. It seemed fairly neutral, more like, just flavors of vintage cider.
Hmm. I mean, cider. I mean, obviously, at one point it would have been served from wood, but yeah, I don't think I've ever seen any ciders marketed like that. Even if you go to like these like obscure little festivals where you get loads of independent sort of ciders, you don't really see any saying like wooded cider. But I don't I don't imagine that it wouldn't work. I mean, I think that the flavors could work quite well potentially. Maybe not bourbon. Yeah, don't use a charred cask.
there's one that there's a cider called Thistley Cross, which occasionally turns up in a Weatherspoons on on their cask cider, which they don't do cider very much. That's interesting, but it says it's whiskey aged, which I don't know what that means. I mean, probably could whiskey cask, sorry, whiskey cask. But I thought it was interesting, but I think, yeah, as you say, Serge, not much different from other vintage ciders. So I don't know whether that um is something I one of the things I struggle with is I feel like I don't have quite as sort of sensitive and discerning a palate as other people. So I'm like trying to get what other people are saying about things because I don't taste the differences as much. So,
Well, then you need to come to our judge training.
well, maybe I do. Yeah, maybe I do. If only I had the time.
I've just noticed the time. I probably have to go as well.
Yeah, same
Yeah,
here.
but
Need to
like
get some sleep.
absolute top effort, especially for a month of January.
Yeah, brilliant.
Okay.
Yeah, really
Yeah,
useful.
thank you very much.
Thank
Thanks,
you. Thank
well.
you all for
Cheers.
coming, and thank
Yeah,
you,
Thanks.
Jen, for helping out. Okay.
yeah.
No
Cheers
worries.
all.
Cheers,
See you
everyone.
soon.
Bye.
Bye bye.
Bye.
And then